Welcome to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. My name is Will Frantz, and I'm here to help you improve your training so you can have more fun out on the trails. Today I want to talk about warm-ups. Before that, just a very quick tip. In Salt Lake, it feels like spring already, but I'm sure winter is going to come back. And if you were like me, maybe you struggle with like cold hands and feet. And I got this tip originally from Jeff Winchester from the Ultra Running Guys, and he has Raynaud's, so I figured I would try it because I really struggle with cold hands when I'm running. If I'm a little hotter in my torso, then my hands and toes don't get as cold if I'm running in like freezing temperatures. It's just protecting my torso from getting cold so that my extremities don't feel like they need to fall off to protect my torso from getting cold. Yes, I'm often a little warmer on the top than I would like to be, but it's not like I'm sweating to death or dying, and it does help me to get away with like a pretty thin glove if I'm running in sub-freezing temperatures. So give it a shot. Gave a couple people that tip last year, and it did seem to help. It's not going to like cure Raynaud's, but it does seem to help. So let's talk about warm-ups today. Big topic. First, should you warm up? And the answer is probably yes. Like, I'm not going to be the one who's super judgy about what that should be. And I definitely don't even know what it should be for you, because it should be very personalized to you and your needs and your current like demands on fitness in your body. Personally, my favorite warm-up for something like running is 10 minutes, pretty easy, focused, we'll get to that later, with a few surges thrown in. Now for lifting, this will look different depending on what I'm trying to do that day and like which lift I'm trying to hit and how heavy I'm trying to go. But before we get into like what's the best warm-up, should probably look at what a warm-up even does and what we're trying to achieve with it so that all the rest of it makes sense. So first, a warm-up should increase your heart rate and core temperature a bit. Now, this was overplayed for years, and as a result, like most things, the pendulum has completely swung the other direction, and we seem to ignore the idea that a warm-up should warm you up, like actually get you moving and get you out of that like sedentary desk position and resting heart rate that we've been in and like get you ready to do some work. Now, in a gym, the reason I say this is overplayed is for many years, trainers would put clients on a bike or a treadmill or whatever pre-strength workout and have them warm up. If you love to do that, I think that's great. But it costs over $100 an hour to see me in person, and I do not need to waste my time or your money by watching you move your feet in circles on a stationary bike. It doesn't really help regarding the lifting session that we're going to do. Now, for running is a great warm-up, especially at slower pace or like with some pickups. But when it comes to lifting, it's not necessarily a helpful thing. If you like it and you want to do it, fantastic, but it's not the best use of your time. Now, when it comes to strength work, the warm-up should be strength-oriented, and it should be relevant to the joints and muscles you're going to use. And if we're doing cardio stuff like running, then it should be running-oriented. Great. Now, 2, it should put your joints through a good range of motion and probably a larger range of motion than the target exercise. Like, if you are going to do some running stuff, this might mean that you're doing things like a hip airplane or some like glute bridges to really focus on glute extension. If your hip has issues, then we want to put that hip through a big range of mobility to make sure that it can handle the relatively short mobility of running. In running, your hip moves side, your femur, your thigh bone moves side to side a little bit. It obviously moves front and back, and it rotates a bit as your pelvis twists while you run. And if we do something like a hip airplane where stand, back, hinge, open up, close, it puts it through all of those ranges of motion, and you can potentially run a little better because we've just gotten the hip used to moving. This could be something like a sprinter's pose, where really pull the knee up towards the chest and stand and drive. There's a bunch of ways to do this, right? Like if you see anybody warming up prior to running or in the gym, they'll often like swing their legs side to side and then front to back and do some torso twists. It's actually not half bad. Like any of these things, mobilizing the relevant joints for what we're trying to do, probably in a larger range of motion than we are going to need to hit in the actual exercise, is a pretty decent idea. Now, on that, we are also looking to like activate muscles, especially muscles that don't necessarily like to come to the party, right? Like we all have muscles that don't necessarily like to play when we go running or when we lift things, and we want to get those primed and ready to go prior to the actual work. A lot of runners, myself included, struggle to really engage their glutes. And this is especially true of distance runners, because we often, like ultra distance runners, because we often end up in the ultra shuffle, and we aren't really creating a ton of hip extension. We're not pushing back with our glutes. We should be. The ultra shuffle should probably be shifted back about 6 inches, but we often don't. So we just use quads and calves and quads and more calves, and this is why we often end up with calf problems. Now, if we are struggling with that, maybe something for glute extension would be a good idea. You could strap a band around a desk, put your foot in it, and kick back. You can do some like glute bridges. You could do some single leg glute bridges. You could do some unweighted hip thrusts. Any of these things would be really great to get your glutes ready to come to the party. If we're doing something like an overhead press where I take a weight and press over my head, if I'm going to get to the top of this position, I want to like fully extend my shoulder back so that I'm locked in here. A lot of the time, this is really tough for people to like find this space. So we end up here. And something like an upward shoulder rotation where you take a cable and your elbows directly out to the side and you open up can be super useful to get that moving and open, right? We can also do something like a wall slide. And we don't need to do both, but I'll get more to that later. Now, if you don't have any of these problems, you probably don't need to do that. But if you do, it can be really good to activate muscles, especially ones that don't like to play along, before we get moving. We're also looking to prep movement patterns. So this is more detailed for strength training, but something like if you're going to squat heavy, then we should make sure a squat feels good today. And I feel like that's a silly thing to say, but it's very true. Like we don't want to just stack a ton of weight on a bar or pick up the heaviest kettlebell if we're doing a goblet squat. We want to take a couple warm-up sets and move into it and make sure things feel good. Like I'm currently doing some heavy-ish back squats and my hip isn't great. A lot of my joints aren't great. So for my hip not to hate me, I needed like 3 to 4 warm-up sets of increasing weight to get to my target weight. It takes 5 to 6 minutes, if we're being honest, if I'm not lazing around and chatting and staring at my phone. Like I do the set, I load the next set, I do the next set. And if I come across something in the process, maybe I'll make some adjustments, but it's a really quick process. And since I very likely have a torn hip labrum, it has probably saved me many injuries. And since I have knee damage, it also has saved me many injuries. Like I've noticed things that aren't right in these warm-up sets, and I fix them before putting a bunch of heavy weight on myself. Very useful. Prep your movement patterns to make sure they feel good. Now, if we're going to look at these movements, I use the example of like an upward shoulder rotation. You don't need multiple warm-ups or multiple workouts or multiple things to prep the same thing, for lack of better language. So you don't need to do both an upward shoulder rotation and a wall slide where you like lay on the floor slide where you lay on the floor and like paint up and down back here, that's doing the same thing. They both prep you for overhead movement. I know which one works better for me, this one, but whatever works better for you, pick one and do that. You do not need to do both. You also probably don't need to activate muscles to which you could have good connection. My quads and calves like to work when I run. Too much. My glutes do not. So I don't need to do calf raises or calf prep because they're going to do it anyway. Glutes, on the other hand, I may need to do some extra movements to prep them. I absolutely have in the past. Right now, I just actually focus during my warm-up and make sure that I'm using them. And by the time I'm done with the 10-minute warm-up, they're working fine. To do some strength training example, like my chest likes to work. Pretty much everybody's chest likes to work because you can like see it flex and make it move. My shoulder blade, my scapula, on the other hand, and the muscles around it, do not. And since I have a separated shoulder here, if I'm doing heavy bench press things, I need to make sure my scapula want to participate, or I'm going to hurt my shoulder again. So I make sure that my shoulder blades do have the ability to like pack down and together into the bench before I do bench work. It needs to fit you. If you have muscles that are participating well, you don't necessarily need to warm them up. If you have muscles that aren't participating well, then we probably want to do something to bring them into the party, especially if they keep you safe, like your scapula movements, or if we're trying to like build a bigger chest and you can't feel your chest during chest movements, doing some kind of warm-up can also help that happen. Now, it can be hard to make adjustments if you don't have a big bag of tricks and aware of what's wrong, right? So like I will usually do a set of bench press and see how that feels. I haven't done, like the way I would prep scap work is I'd hang from a bar and pack them down. It's called a scapular pull-up. And I haven't needed to do that in weeks, months, but I could if needed. And I would just do a warm-up set, realize something feels off, and then toss it in there. Now, if you are doing running stuff, like I will start, I will go out the door and just do the thing. And if something feels off or wrong, I'll step off to the side of the trail or the sidewalk, do whatever I need to do to get that moving. But it does require a bag of tricks and the knowledge on how to use them. And this is a very hard thing to explain over the internet because there's like hundreds of exercises that may apply to you and you need to figure out the ones that actually work. So if you don't have those bag of tricks, it might be worth seeing a PT. I'm happy to talk with you, whatever, right? Now, the elephant in the room often with warm-ups is stretching. And this was a big deal forever. I don't know how many of you did the stretching circle in PE before you actually started PE class, but for me, we did the stretchy things. We did it before every practice. We did it before all the stuff. Stretching was a large part of my youth, even though I was not flexible. And this was a very big deal forever. And then a couple of studies came out and said it wasn't great, and then it aggressively fell out of favor. Now, you hear the opposite, where if you do static stretching before a workout, you are going to get hurt and things are going to tear and you're going to have problems. And there's just a lot of fear mongering around stretching. And it's more complicated as is everything, right? Like if you stretch for a while to relax your muscles and then try to do powerful sprints, that is a dumb idea. You will probably get hurt. Don't do your speed session directly after an hour-long, relaxing yin or vinyasa yoga class. It's a great way to hurt things, or at the very least, just not have a lot of power. But stretching can be super useful to achieve symmetry. So let's go back to my hip. Due to my labrum issues, my right piriformis is always tighter. So if I do a piriformis stretch, my left doesn't feel anything, and my right very tight. And this definitely creates some stability issues when I run. So if I stretch it for a little bit before work, especially like hard workouts, it helps. And when we are stretching pre-working out, we're looking to create some level of symmetry side to side or front to back or in whatever rotation, right? We're trying to be fairly balanced, especially in something like running where you're using both legs. So if you're not naturally somewhat symmetrical, then we want to try to get there. Now, if you have something like scoliosis, you will not be perfectly symmetrical and you can do just fine. But we're looking to build some level of symmetry before we do work. I train someone with scoliosis, and we have to spend a little more time opening one of her hips than the other before we would do like a heavy squat. But it's not a big process. Now, if you need a range of motion and like you don't have access to it, we might spend a little even more time there, right? Now, once we have acquired that range of motion, we want to gain control over it. So for example, to run, we need to create some level of like internal hip rotation. Otherwise, we end up like super duck-footed and you're just pushing off like the ball of your big toe, and it's a problem. We're trying to like push off through like your big and second toes as you drive through. And if your feet are constantly turned out, we're not really going to be able to do that very well, and your running is going to be problematic. So we could do something like a 90-90 to create internal rotation. And then we could do a like low weight strength movement to gain control over that movement. It will take 5 minutes. I personally like a front foot elevated split squat. Put your foot up on a 6-inch box, lower slowly under control, down into a split squat, come back up, and you'll control that internal rotation in your hip. That can be a great prep thing if you struggle with like duck-footedness and external rotation in your femurs. Now, all of that on how to create a warm-up, this is like the biggest reason we do them. The biggest purpose of a warm-up is to gauge whether you're actually ready to do the work today. And if you warm up with some level of focus, you will know by the end of it whether it actually feels like a good idea to do the work you're going to do today. I had a hard workout scheduled today. I have not been sleeping very well this week. It happens. I have some mild insomnia issues, and it just hasn't been a great week. And that said, I felt pretty good and decided to give it a shot. Then the warm-up felt much harder than it should have, which is a pretty good warning sign that I probably wasn't going to get the work done I wanted to do. So I tried the first interval, made a very quick adjustment because it just wasn't going to be productive, right? It's not, if I'd pushed through it, I would at best been unproductive and not created the output I wanted to create. At worst, I would have gotten hurt. So instead of doing some like high speed intervals, I switched to a fartlek and some hill sprints because that is a very relevant swap for what I was trying to do. So that said, it wasn't during the first interval that I got my first sign. It was during the warm-up. I knew going into that first interval that there was a high likelihood I was going to have to pull the plug. And I did. And that's okay. Right? We need to be able to make adjustments to our training. You're not like a slave to the plan. We are really trying to adapt as needed because things happen. Now, your warm-up will probably change over time. As you gain more range of motion or change your range of motion and you get stronger and more stable, things will fall off. You won't need to do as much. I used to do a fairly long warm-up for certain movements and a pretty decent one for running. Now I don't. Now I just go run. I focus for 10 minutes and I throw in some surges to make sure that my leg turnover feels good and I can create some power and call it a day. I don't need to do a bunch of stretching and control movements and priming my glutes and all these things. I just run. And it depends where you are in your journey as to where what you'll need, and that will probably fall off. Over time, your warm-up will probably get shorter. And that may not be true like in the ultra long term. Like if you're running for 50 years, your warm-up at age 70 will probably be a little longer than your warm-up at age 30. But over a couple year span, and especially if we're talking about like movement deficiencies and imbalances, the warm-up will shorten because you'll just be able to get into the position you need to access without having to do a bunch of prep work beforehand. So to recap, your warm-up should increase heart rate and core temperature, like actually get you warm. It should put your joints through a good range of motion. It should activate muscles you need, especially the lazier ones that don't like to come to the fitness party. It should prep relevant movement patterns, whatever you're trying to do. It should help you gauge whether you're ready to do the work, and it should change over time as necessary, depending on what access you've gained and changes you've made. So I hope this was helpful. I realize it's not like specific instructions on how to create yours, but you can't really do that to a bunch of people at once. This is one of the reasons like you talk to a trainer or build a big bag of tricks, right? So if you have any questions and you would like a little help on this, please shoot me a message. I'd be happy to help you go through a movement assessment and see what's going on. And if not, I hope this made sense. That's it. I really hope this was helpful. So have a great rest of your day. Whenever you're listening to this, I'm going to go eat some dinner, and I will be back soon with another one. Thank you for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Honestly, I'm still surprised and honored that anybody wants to hear what I have to say, so thank you. To be clear, not a doctor, nor a registered dietitian, or any other kind of medical professional. I'm a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, and a running coach, and I have a passion for training trail runners. You should always speak with a qualified medical professional before making any changes to your training or nutrition program. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please take a second to leave a rating or review. I'd really appreciate it, or you could just share it with someone for whom you think it might be helpful. I make these kinds of things in order to provide more quality, free resources to people, so the more people who hear it, the better. If you want more of this information, please head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training group on Facebook, where we discuss all aspects of training so you can have more fun doing the sport that you love. Thank you again for listening.